So as somebody who discusses art 24/7, both in the real world and here online, something I encounter very often is these art is statements. It's surprisingly common to find people who will go, to me, art is X, right? And have a statement on why this abstraction of art is what they believe defines the whole of art as a concept, right? I think this is best suited with an example rather than trying to explain it using fill-in-the-blank prompts. So a very common one that I'll see is like, art is all context for me. There is no such thing as good or bad art. All art is just defined by the context in which it exists in, right? And I've been wanting for a while to make a paint and talk and to come here and talk about two of these in specific and kind of this whole art is thing as a whole, because I think it's interesting. Oftentimes I see these statements so much because they're the ones that inspire the most discourse. Obviously, that's what ends up doing very well here on the internet. So, if I were to make a TikTok right now going, art is context, nothing more, nothing less, argue with the wall. 100 people will argue with the wall and each other inevitably in the comments. Whereas if you make a nuanced position and do all that stuff, people will come at it and you'll get probably a higher quality discussion going, but the video will do less well. That's how the internet works. That's how social media kind of prompts these things. So because of that, I see a lot of these statements, and oftentimes they spark conversations that go something like this. One guy comes in, art is context. Nothing else, nothing less, nothing more. Art is context. Then a second guy comes in going, this is stupid, and they'll point to 10 pieces of art that are completely, this is great without context, or this is not propped up by its context. And then 10 more guys come in going, no, look at all these art pieces that are propped up by context. And then another guy comes in going, you're both right. And then another guy comes in going, you're both wrong. And it always ends up like this, right? And I think part of the reason, before I even go into this claim of art as context, part of the reason why I think it sparks this kind of discussion is because the statement to begin with, whether it's meant to be by the person saying it or not, is an absolute statement, which is going to read people having absolute responses. For an example, if I were to say to you all right now, I think this canvas in front of me is a little bit small to my liking, but not terrible, right? That will prompt a lot of people going, maybe you get a bigger canvas, whatever, X, Y, Z, right? But if I go, this is the worst canvas I've ever seen, I will have a bunch of people going, that's a great canvas. You should like the canvas. You'll get kind of people going in the opposite direction. And I think that's what a statement like this does, where it's weird, right? And this is such a phenomenon that's exacerbated by the internet, where people are incapable of going, or maybe it's just, I don't know if people on the internet are incapable of going okay, let's not say something that extreme, let's have more reasonable conversation around this, or just that all the people like myself who see a conversation like that and go this is a little much, I don't know why everybody's doing all this, just keep scrolling. And the people who will go, no, art is not context has nothing to do with art, are the ones more likely to comment. Maybe it's that, but either way, this is my first issue with these statements, is that they are inherently very reductive. They lead to sort of a conversation in extremes, and I think this is an even more annoying thing to me, because oftentimes, these statements have a tiny, not even a tiny kernel, they have a great bit of truth to them that is lost in the way that it's delivered. You know what I mean? When you try to bring something as broad and as big as art itself back down into this reductive framework of art is, that's always gonna lead to a really, I feel like it's weird even to be this is gonna lead to a bad conversation, but it's never gonna lead to a good one. You know what I mean? It's never gonna lead to a real battle in the free marketplace of ideas, like having a more level-headed take to begin with would, right? Try just right now for an exercise to take anything in your life. Think of something really complicated in your life. Love is a great example, right? Everybody has felt it in one way or another, and Oftentimes it comes in various forms, X, Y, Z, we're all familiar with the cliches here. Boil down love in your life to a statement. Love is X. Some of you could come up with really good and interesting answers. Honestly, some of these answers could even end up reading more like poems than comments, but it still will never be as accurate as expressing it in a way that's, maybe more wider in breadth and depth, and even maybe a little bit more artistic even, let's say. But that's exactly what a lot of these statements of art end up doing. They end up taking something that otherwise could be very interesting. Because when it comes to a statement, right, let's dive directly into one here. Art is context. Saying art is context is actually a really sort of like a great observation. There is a huge amount of art, and especially our perceptions that have to do with art, that have to do with context. Great example of this is why are none of the greatest painters in like the classical painters, right? I'm thinking like 1500s. Why are they all white guys from Italy? Like, why are they all just a bunch of Italian guys who all happen to be painting Jesus? Right? It's not because that's where just the best guys were doing it. It's not like everybody, it wasn't like everybody was like, oh my God, Mom, I want to be a painter. I got to go to Florence. No, it was the fact that, it was the time they were in. It was the Medici family. It's history. It's all these things, right? So when pointing to something like this, the statement art is context actually is very insightful. But when you say art is just context, you ignore all the other pieces that don't have as much of that. I think a great example is moving away from the idea of historical context for a second and moving just into an idea of more direct, like literal physical context. A great example of this is the banana on the wall, right? We're all familiar with this. It's everybody's famous piece to go like, look, this is dumb and I don't like this. The banana on the wall is a great example of a piece that is like 99.9999% defined by its context, right? If that banana was not in a museum, it would just be a banana and duct tape, right? And then you put it in a museum and it becomes a statement, it becomes a thing. And that's how you get that piece of art. That's all context. So in that case, it's maybe not, accurate still, but more fair to go, this art is context. Then I think, and many people will disagree with this, I think, too. How many times do I say I think, oh my God, but a lot of people might disagree with this. I think Jackson Pollock's a great example of an artist who works less in context, because I think that the paintings themselves evoke emotions. Certain Pollocks, I think, are really great at doing this. I think probably a safer example I should have gone with there are very many Picassos that have a time-tested ability to make people look at them and go, that's brilliant, right away. That's a great example of art that requires less context. So that's why for me, I think all art is context is a really problematic thing to do, because it's reducing, I feel like, oh my God, I feel like going like that's a problematic thing to do. It's such an annoying way to phrase that. I'm not trying to be like, this is something I hate, that this is such a side tangent I'm about to go on here, but something I hate that I see so much on the internet, especially because my algorithms in spaces where people, like, everybody has a take, you know what I mean? Like, it's all just people going back and forth with things they think about stuff. So, like, something I'll see so often is people trying to, like, police the way that other people express their takes, rather than trying to put more effort into trying to wrap their head around them, right? Like, rather than, so I hate these statements, these art is statements. I hate reductive statements in general, because I have an addiction to nuance. It's one of my favorite things, is being like, I love having a huge conversation that goes in a million directions, covers every nook and cranny, and maybe doesn't get you a definite answer. It's a huge thing for me. I still will be seeing these, like, blank is statements probably for the rest of my life. I mean, people do it so much in the real world. And I think, like, the internet kind of has this thing where it's, instead of just being like, okay, like, people are going to be reductive about it, you gotta dig through and have, as an example of this, oh my God, I just stuttered so much. As an example of this, I find these statements annoying, right? I think my response to that is to try and have a nuanced discussion about why I find them annoying, X, Y, Z, you know, go into why I think they're reductive, but also get to some truth, and I find that annoying. I think a lot of people instead have the idea of like, you need to put things like this is a bad trap to fall into rhetorically, and we shouldn't be doing that. Something I've encountered myself, and honestly I think I've probably said, is like, people shouldn't say it's not that deep, because like I think it's annoying, right? I've had multiple people say actually they shouldn't say it's not that deep because it's a thought-terminating cliche that discourages academic discourse. And it's like, listen, I hear you, I get it, and you're probably right. You've probably read a lot more books than me, and like I completely understand where you're coming from in your frustrations with this, especially if you're hearing this in academic contexts. When I'm deciding for an hour what hot dog to get, and my friend goes, it's not that deep, he's got a point on me. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't know. I think sometimes we everything needs to be discourse now. Everything needs to be a discussion, which is why, like, I don't even remember how I started saying this, but I would never say like we shouldn't say X, Y, Z, or we shouldn't do X, Y, Z, because I think it just leads to, I don't know, I think it's just like an annoying way to do things. You know, if you are going to be like, you shouldn't say this because it's going to lead to an unhealthy conversation, I think what really leads to an unhealthy conversation is trying to give people frameworks to say things. Like, this isn't Mad Libs, we're two guys talking. Like, it's not, you know, it's people's responsibility to communicate in ways that make sense to both people, you know? I think we've really lost that with how the internet likes to be like, do things XYZ way, or like, this is a bad thing. But that's just a whole side tangent about the internet. We were talking about context and art, and I think that that's where these statements annoy me, right? Because they almost exist in this like, in this paradox of being the worst take on earth, because it's inherently very reductive. It's a very reductive thing to go, art is X, but they also always get to a nugget of truth. I think actually that side tangent that this went on is somewhat informative past just being a tangent, because I will say I think that part of this is because of how the internet works. You know what I mean? I briefly touched on it before, but when you don't have all these platforms that kind of train our brain to work in ways that work in little snippets like this, I think it'd be a lot less common to have any sort of discourse take a form of a statement like this. You know, let's put ourselves in the shoes of people who are doing their primary discourse in books and letters and things that are inherently going to be a little bit longer because they're just longer forms of communication. If you were to write a letter to somebody about a painting you saw and they responded, you know, art is context, unless you thought you were talking to a genius and they had some revelation that was really cool, you're going to be like, you know, and you're going to be like, what else is there? So I think this is part of the reason why this exists in the way it does, right? Another statement that I see so often, the second one that motivated me to come and have this conversation, was is art is intent. And I think this is once again following the same exact pattern as the first one, where it's like, a great deal of art is intent. Especially people like to use this one when referring to how to evaluate art. They go like, I completely evaluate art by intent. How much direct intent does the artist put onto the piece? How meticulous are they looking at things? How much are they cutting off? How much are they putting on? You know, will their piece be in this perfect state by the end where you can't add or subtract anything to it without ruining it because of the amount of amazing intent they've put into it? I think that this is, once again, extremely reductive and leads to nothing productive in terms of conclusions, but at the same time does get to a lot of truths about how art works. A great deal of art is intent, and that's actually one of the most valid ways of looking at art, right? If there's something haphazard versus something not haphazard, and you can tell, and you can be like, they put way much more time into that, this is way more crafted than nothing, that's pretty legitimate. And you guys know I'm somebody who's like, all art is subjective, you know, I'm one of those annoying guys. this is like one, not a hole in the line of thinking of art being subjective, but it's definitely it's not like a hole, but it's almost an antidote. You know what I mean? Like if you're somebody that I find myself being this person somewhat often, even I'll say, who's like, art is subjective, and I don't like that because I wish I had a way to analyze things better. Like I find myself thinking that a lot, especially when I'm getting too in my head about a piece of art or whatever. You want a framework to analyze, and the antidote for that can be going, I think the amount of intent in this is what I'll analyze, what I'll quantify here. And then from there, if you are a believer in this, you could totally extrapolate more intent good, less intent bad, right? I don't like this, and I think, once again, statement that gets to a lot of truth there as we discuss it, and then there's the reductive part of it. And the reason I don't like it, because I think it's a slippery slope. If you say a great deal of art's intent, that's very different than going art is intent, because let's say art is intent. Art is intent implies that we have to take this all the way. You can't just go, intent is important to me. You have to go, intent is the top over here and the bottom over here. Intent is everything. Art is intent, right? So that means that if I take all my time and put all my effort into a piece and make sure every little thing there is perfect, if I'm doing it on the computer, every pixel is exactly where I want it to be, that will inherently be a better piece of art than Picasso, who undoubtedly had a stroke that he messed up on Guernica, right? Nobody would agree with that, obviously. Like, that's not how art works. So, once again, it's a reductive statement. It's a statement that doesn't work. It also doesn't work in the fact that you can't know sometimes you can't know what the artist was doing in the studio. You can ask them, was all of this purposeful? They can lie still. But even beyond that, like, how do we can't go back and ask Michelangelo if, like, he was like, oh, actually, I wanted the finger to be a little more straight on the creation of man. Like, we can't do that. So it ends up being a slippery slope once again. And that's why I think that this statement, just like the last one, falls into this really annoying zone of being super insightful and cutting into something really good without actually getting all the way to an answer, which is what a statement like that suggests it will do when you simplify something down to that sort of absolute, right? So that's why I find any statement saying art is to be reductive and unproductive. That rhymed. So yeah. I feel like I have like something like a bow to put on this to wrap it up. Like I feel like I should be like, like I don't even have like a question to ask you guys. Like, comment down below your art is statements. Like I don't have anything like that today. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the talk. I feel like the most fun thing to do here would be if you guys have statements of art is that you think are like kind of winners, you know what I mean? Of like, you can make this statement, art is excellent, accurate. I'd love to hear them. The only one I could really think of when I was coming to record this was art is subjective. But even that doesn't work because there are objective ways of looking at art, you know what I mean? Like, art is subjective, this is still black, and this is still ochre mixed with black to make a weird kind of muddy, ugly green, right? So like those are two objective facts. We can check the wavelengths and figure those things out, or however light and color work. So I don't know, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. This is the painting. It'll be on the Instagram next Sunday, so follow to see it over there. And until next time, guys, gals, and pals, my name is Max Dice. This has been Paint and Talk episode 168. I'm here every morning, painting and talking with you all.